Good evening, everybody. Good to see all of you. How many of you have never been to one of these before? Okay, we got a few of you, so I'll just briefly touch what we're doing and why we're doing this. We are not trying to be political like Democrat or Republican or anything like that. But we do feel obligated to take a stand for godly morality, righteousness, take a stand for some good things in this country, and hopefully inspire other churches to do the same. Plus, it gives us the ability, like our candidates here tonight and so forth, gives us the ability to really get a firsthand experience with them, ask them questions and so forth, which helps. But we're not trying to be political, we're trying to be godly and bring some of that back to the nation. So that's why we're doing what we're doing. We will have a question and answer period at the end, so we're tentatively gonna have 3 speakers, and I'll let Dieta share that. I have a question for you though. Not this week Friday, next week Friday, Shahram Hadian is going to be here talking about Iran and what's going on there and that whole world scene. Okay, so that's a week and a half. We have 2 other candidates who've contacted us who would like to come. Patrick Knight, who's running for governor, and Michelle Tafoya, who's running for the U.S. Senate. We would have to do it either next week or the following on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, presuming that's all the nights we have left here, presuming they could come on one night and fit it into one of those 2 weeks, either a Tuesday or a Wednesday night. Presuming they can make it work, we don't want to wear you out. And we would still like somebody to be here. So if we can get a night, not this week, but in the next 2 weeks where Patrick and Michelle could come and speak and let us ask them questions and so forth, would you come?
On Tuesday, but not Wednesday, traditional church night.
Yep, I know, I get it.
I would not come on Wednesday.
Most of you could be here, looks like. Okay. How many know you absolutely are not interested in coming to either one of those 2? Oh, okay. That's not bad. All right, well, let's see what we can do. We'd have to put them on one night. So it's going to be up to their schedule whether they can make that happen or not. That's all we have available. It's kind of a last-minute thing, and we'll accommodate them if we can. So let's start with prayer, and then, Dieta, you can introduce our speakers. Lord, we thank you for this evening. We're asking again for wisdom and insight as your people. We want to see where things are hidden. We want to understand what's going on, not what we're told on the surface. We want to understand what's going on below the surface so that we can have influence and that we can vote correctly and that we are doing something to promote your kingdom in this world, especially in the state and the federal governments. So we're asking for your help. Give us wisdom tonight. Bless the speakers. Help them to speak plainly and openly and freely. In Jesus' name, amen.
All right, thank you guys for coming tonight. So we do have a 3rd speaker, and that's going to be Adam Schwarzy. He's running for U.S. Senate. He had another commitment today, so he's running from that to here. So we'll start with these 2, and then we'll just kind of roll with it and see when we fit him in as soon as he gets here. So that'll be great to have him here as well. But first, we're going to have Tad Jude come up. He's running for Minnesota's Secretary of State. And I'd love to have him kind of talk about what the Secretary of State does, as well as who he is and why he's running. Thank you.
Thank you. Dieta, it's a real privilege to be here tonight and to be a part of your Faith and Freedom program. And I see the 2 of them being intertwined. If you have faith in Jesus Christ, it gives you freedom. And I've seen a real relationship between, if you go back, I've got some legal training, I've got a law degree. I see our Creator giving us the natural law, And the natural law gets reflected in our Declaration of Independence and in our Constitution, in the founding documents of our country and of our state. And eventually, hopefully, the law that you and I live with and is applied in our daily lives reflect that Constitution and the way it gets applied. So it's all inspired by a deep faith in Jesus Christ and the blessings we've been given. And in any case, my name is Tad Jewett. I'm running for Secretary of State. And yet indicated I should probably tell you a little bit about what the Secretary of State does. And that's a good idea because I have been asked whether I'm running against Marco Rubio. And I have to, that's one of the things I every once in a while get asked. But I'm running against Steve Simon. Steve Simon has been Secretary of State for the last 12 years, and he has a very low profile in state government, but it's a very important job. Yes. And you could ask the Speaker of the House. The Speaker of the House, Lisa Demuth, has basically, you were elected Speaker, I think, as a result of a big problem created by our Secretary of State, Steve Simon, at the beginning of the legislature last year. When they organized, there was 67 Democrats, 67 Republicans. And the Secretary of State is asked to do a lot of ceremonial type things or administrative type things until they aren't. And they're big things, like organizing the Minnesota House. Supposedly, the Secretary of State is to convene the Minnesota House, and that's it. That's what it says in the Constitution. But he went beyond that and was recognizing whether or not there was a quorum present. And that's something that's not delegated to the Secretary of State. So there was going to be a great big court case about this, and then, for 3 weeks, the Democrats didn't have to show up, and were still paid to do nothing in the Minnesota House. That was because of Steve Simon. But there are a lot of other things where the Secretary of State, I think, plays a critical role where he or she can put their hands on the machinery of state government in a critical and sometimes determinative way. Secretary of State is responsible for all the election administration in the state of Minnesota. And one of the things our Secretary of State has been refusing to do is to work with their partners in other levels of government, like the federal government. Our Department of Justice wants to clean up our voting rolls, make sure that, in Minnesota, in order to vote, you need to be 18, you need to be a legal resident of Minnesota, you need to be a legal U.S. citizen. Importantly, you need to be alive. And that's what the federal government's trying to determine. The federal government's trying to determine whether you're a legal U.S. citizen, whether you're alive, and all those requirements. But the Secretary of State has to work with the townships, has to work with the counties, has to work with the school districts, has to work with the cities, has to work with the federal government to just clean up our voting rolls. And I will do that as Secretary of State. Our Secretary of State right now is in lawsuits. He's got a federal civil lawsuit where they're saying, we want to have access to the voting records. He won't give them access to the voting records. It makes no sense because he's giving access to a nonprofit that he pays a lot of money to that represents maybe half the states, not even that. But he won't use the federal government, what they call the Save Voting Rolls in Washington, which he can use free to clean up the voting rolls. He won't do that. It doesn't make any sense. So anyway, that's one of the jobs. The other job, big job of the Secretary of State, is to register businesses. And we've had a lot of fraudulent nonprofits operating in the state of Minnesota. Somehow, we're so loosey-goosey, we have people coming here from other states to take advantage of Minnesota taxpayers. They'll come here from Pennsylvania. You know, it used to be that Minnesota was known as a good government state. You know, we'd have openness, we'd have transparency. Now, people in Illinois or New Jersey or Louisiana, they look at Minnesota and they see taxpayer money available. So that's a big job of the Secretary of State. Secretary of State takes care of all the open appointments. So, you know, when we have a good Republican governor, you know, we can, you know, appoint good people to different boards and commissions in the state of Minnesota. And that all goes through the Secretary of State's office. Secretary of State registers people, of course, to run for public office. I don't think our current Secretary of State has done a real good job of doing some of that. We had a legislator a couple of years ago who actually had a Wisconsin driver's license, and I don't think he lived in the district he was supposed to be representing in St. Paul. But, you know, I could go on and on about what the Secretary of State does or doesn't do. I just want to give you a little bit of the background, of my background. I was born in St. Cloud, the oldest of 11 children, and I took care of my littler brothers and sisters a little bit. And I could tell you a story, I could tell you stories that go on and on and on. But I would go around with my mom and dad delivering grocery supplies to small businesses through a lot of central Minnesota. And I got to know the needs of small businesses doing that. And in fact, I do own a small business right now that's up and operating, and you know, I'm also commander of a local American Legion post in Fridley. It's post 303. I'm a veteran. So I went on to law school. I went to William Mitchell, St. Thomas College is where I went for undergraduate. And I've really enjoyed being involved in public policy. Now, some people say, well, you've got a lot of experience, but what good does it do? You know, we don't need somebody with experience anymore. You know, I'll explain one of the bills I worked on in the legislature that I really think was a result of having a little experience, and that was a bill to include unborn children under the protection of Minnesota criminal law. So, you know, if you see an expectant mother getting beaten up to kill the unborn child, that is prosecuted by prosecutors today. And that's because of a bill I chief authored in the legislature. And that's one of the times I think experience was real important. Now, I went on from being in the legislature, I was a Hennepin County Commissioner for 4 years. Then I went on to be a district court judge. And I was a district court judge, and if you have questions about the court system, I'll be happy to give you my opinions on them. I've got a lot of opinions, but the main thing I want to do is to make things work. I want to have elections to be fair, open, transparent, and accountable. The same thing with our court system. And we can talk about that a little bit. So the area I represented in the courts, I was out in Stillwater most of the time. It was 11 years, but I was in Cambridge, Cambridge at least once, and I was up in Mora once, and I was up in Pine City, and I'd be in Anoka. It was kind of, they call it the 10th district. And if you look at these districts, they don't make a lot of sense in some ways. And that's one of the things I think as Secretary of State, I could have a little influence on. And I think my experience would be of some benefit. But there is one thing that I think has to be addressed that isn't talked about a lot, and it's a big problem. And that is when you go and vote on the back of the ballot for judges. How many think you need to have more information when you go vote on judges? Yeah, I mean, it's a blind ballot that you're casting. And we have to address that. Now, I brought with me tonight a couple of things. Now, Yetta said I had a couple minutes to speak, so I'm not going to take too long here. This is what you call the legislative manual or the blue book. It's put out by the Secretary of State, and you've got the Constitution of Minnesota in there. And you got the founding documents of our country and of our state in here, and you have the election returns in here. It's very interesting to read this. But you find out that judges are supposed to be elected in Minnesota. So they call the back of the ballot an election. Now, how many people think that's an open and fair and informed election? No. And we pay a high price for that. We've got a Minnesota Supreme Court right now that has 7 people on it, all appointed by Governor Dayton or Governor Walz. That's not fair. If you have a case before the Minnesota Supreme Court, you have no hope of getting an Antonin Scalia on the bench in Minnesota right now. No. You don't have any diversity of opinion. I mean, it might look like you have the bar scene out of Star Wars up there on the Minnesota Supreme Court, a diverse group. But you don't have diversity of opinion. And elections should at least create some balance. And if you have a case before a court, you want to have an impartial court. You want to have an open court. You want to have a fair court. And those are things that should be talked about a little bit. Because that's not fair to the litigants, it's not fair to the taxpayer, it's not fair really to the court system. So we can do better. And I'd like to do that as Secretary of State. Now, so I think my experience would help a little bit in that area. You know, there are some things we can do. That's not my time, is it? Okay. I just wanted to make sure. Well, anyway, there are a few things, and you know, I have had some experience running for election and have been able to do okay on the ballot, and I think that's important. We have to win. Yes. You know, I've been a winner in at least 10 general elections, you know, more primary elections, and that's what we need to do in Minnesota. I ran for Congress down in the 3rd District 2 years ago, and we were 5% better than the top of the ticket. And we do that across the state, we win. And in any case, you know, I'm running because, you know, I really love Minnesota. You know, I love God, love my family. Jackie and I live in Maple Grove, kind of where 494, 94 come together. And I think we can make a difference. We can improve our elections. We can have photo ID when you go vote. Amen. We could have the Minnesota version of the SAVE Act to make sure people are legal U.S. citizens when they go vote. We could have that on your driver's license. Now we have driver's licenses for everybody. But it doesn't indicate whether or not you're a legal U.S. citizen. I support paper ballots. I'd like to have, you know, look into having a watermark on the ballots to make sure they're legitimate. Amen. In the last election, they had 10 cases of ballots sitting out in the parking lot in Edina City Hall, just sitting there with nobody watching them. And we've got vouching. We have to get rid of vouching. Steve Simon's been going around the state advocating ranked choice voting. And ranked choice voting is going to be an incredible nightmare from the standpoint that you vote for 3, 4, 5 people, and then they keep on counting, and then they keep on counting, and then they keep on counting. It doesn't make a lot of sense. I think it creates more gamesmanship and confusion and you name it. But that's what Steve Simon's been advocating. Now, the thing that I think is really a slap in the face of Minnesotans, if you look at this blue book, this is written by the Secretary of State, and you can order one on the internet, get it sent to you if you send the money for shipping. Okay, I'm going to just point out to you. You open it up.
Use the mic again.
Okay. Okay. Here on the dedication page, he dedicates it to his special project. His special project then gets a full color section. So his special project was replacing our historic traditional Minnesota flag. He was the only elected official that sat on the commission that decided on the design of the Minnesota flag. And I look at it, I mean, how many people would like to go back to our historic traditional Minnesota flag? I mean, this means something. You know, it means our history. It means honoring working men and women, our natural resources. We're going to have a vote on it when I'm Secretary of State, and I will dedicate the next blue book to having a vote on the Minnesota flag. So that is going to be a big issue. But with that, I think I've probably taken enough time here, and I'd be happy to visit about questions you might have about our court system or questions you might have about the race. So, thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. So for all of you and those who are live streaming with us, Adam looks like he'll be here about 8:20-ish. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to have Lisa come up and speak. And then we don't live stream the Q&A and we don't record the Q&A. But then we'll do some Q&A with the two candidates that we have. And then when Adam comes, we'll do the same with him. Okay? All right. So next up, we have Lisa Demuth, and she is Speaker of the House and running for governor. Thank you.
Hey, well, good evening, everyone. It's good to be with you. Great to be with you this evening. My name is Lisa Demuth. I am a candidate for governor, and I have to tell you, with hosting this at your church, how many of you attend this church? All right. Hosting this at a church makes me feel very much at home. So I'm going to let you know a little bit about me. I'll let you know a little bit about my background and the work that I'm doing, and then I want to tell you just more why I'm running for governor and why Minnesota matters so very much to me. I was born and raised Minnesota in Paynesville, so thanks Central Minnesota. I know I talked to someone that grew up near, yes, there you are, grew up in the Cold Spring area. My husband's family lived in the Cold Spring area, and they had many foster kids that they welcomed into their home. And so I got to meet someone that actually remembered that time and the horses and the farm, and I appreciate that. But Minnesota matters, and I think where we look at where we are right now, it's not what we remember. And I'm not talking about as we look forward to what could be. I'm not talking about taking us back in time, but some of those core things that mattered very much. So when you think about Minnesota being a place that families could just afford their lives, they knew that their kids, if they chose public, private, whatever school, they were going to get an excellent education. Basic things, and also that our tax dollars when we chose to send them in to the state, that they were used wisely. Remember when it used to be invested into things that mattered, our infrastructure, our law enforcement, our cities, and our schools. We've come so far from that. And yet, to me, Minnesota is too good to give up on. And that is why I've chosen both to serve in the legislature, but now making the decision to run for governor, because I don't want to give up on this state. And I hear when people talk about, well, I have to leave the state for 6 months and a day because of the taxes. I have 4 adult kids and 7 grandkids, and I don't want to have to be gone. I want to go to everything they have. I have a grandkid running track tonight. My husband is there so that he could cheer that kid on while I am here. But that is what I want people to be able to stay. Now, for people that get a little tired of the winter and weather, if you want to go for a week or 2 weeks or whatever, that is great. I think that's wonderful, but you shouldn't have to feel like you can only afford your life if you move out of state. And so growing up, we lived in the Paynesville area until I was 7. My dad is black. My mom is white. So I was mercilessly teased almost every day, called the N-word, in first grade. Now, it was a big 4th grade kid. I don't know who he was, but I had a principal and teachers that said, that is wrong. And I had no idea what that word meant. But they said, that is wrong. You come to us. And so I felt like I had an advocate there as a 7-year-old, but yet my parents decided it was too hard. And so we moved to the metro area just for a little bit more diversity, went to a private Christian school that first year, and we moved to South Minneapolis. And then because of housing and jobs, then we moved to Robbinsdale and to St. Louis Park and back to South Minneapolis and in Bloomington. So we moved around a lot. But I think the reason I tell you that about my background, I never quite fit in. And sometimes that makes you stronger later on. I was never black enough for the black kids, and I was never white enough for the white kids. And so I just worked hard and did whatever, made sense to me, had a really super loving family and good close friends. But I think when people talk about challenges that you end up finding as an adult, I think maybe that's why I can let so many things roll off, because that's how I learned to do. Don't let those things hold you back that get in your way. Push through them and do the right thing. I moved back as an adult, back to the Paynesville area by choice, and it's an honor to be from that area, from greater Minnesota. I have the unique perspective as any of the other Republican candidates for governor of living in greater Minnesota and the metro area at 2 different times. So I kind of have a little bit more unique perspective. My husband and I, like I said, we have 4 kids, 4 adult kids, but he is a business owner. I'm a business owner, so I know firsthand when things happen in St. Paul and decisions are made, we can either make it easier for families and businesses, or we can make it harder. And what I'll tell you is we have made it harder. The decisions that have been made in the legislature and by the governor, we have made it much harder for people to afford their lives. And I'm talking about things such as paid family leave, excessive taxes, and those things that make it just a little bit harder to afford things. I also ate Pringles on the way here for dinner, so... Full on, you'll get the true Lisa Dameth here. I always have a peanut butter sandwich in my backpack because I never want to go hungry. And I found Pringles in the car from the weekend, and it was awesome. But anyway, but when I think about those things as a small business owner and how we can provide jobs, our businesses are the backbone of our communities, whether they are very small or a little bit larger business. They are the ones that are providing both the jobs and the taxes and the infrastructure that we need for the state. So in 2007, we were raising a family, working really hard, and I saw in the newspaper that the Rocori School Board had an election for 3 members and only 1 incumbent had filed. Now, this was after the filing deadline. And so we still got the St. Cloud Times in the actual paper. I did what made sense to me. I tore the article out and I left it at my husband's place for dinner. And he came home and we sat down. I said, hey, you know what? I read this article. You're going to need to run for the school board. And he just looked horrified. I mean, he's in manufacturing, design. He's like, I would never do that. Now, his dad was in education. His dad was a superintendent, and he had a brother that's a teacher. And he said, I would never do that. And he said, you do that. I immediately said, I can't do that. And he asked the best question, which was, why not? And I said, I don't know. I had never been told. I told you that a little bit about my background growing up. Nobody had ever said, hey, Lisa, you can never run for the school board. I just never thought of it. So it was past the filing date, which meant my name was not going to be on the ballot. People needed to remember my name. And I'll give you a little hint on my name. Dameth is how it's pronounced, my last name. If you remember Joe Namath, it rhymes, okay? Now, remember him as the big, strong football player, not the infomercial dude right now. But, so I knew people had to remember my name. I talked to teachers. I talked to the superintendent. I talked to other people and said, I don't really know what it means, but I believe my community needs me to serve in this role. I'm going to run for the school board. Without any marketing background, I'm thinking, what could I use that would help? I had pencils printed with www.electlisadamath.com and handed those out. I needed people to remember that I needed to be written in. Well, 4 people ended up running for the 3 spots, and I ended up being elected. I went on to serve 3 complete terms, finishing at the end of 2018, because I felt like I had served well, and it was time for that next person, whoever that was, to come in that role. Our graduation rates were good. Our student test scores were good. We had finished a needed building project and an expansion. And so I was going to be done. And in the end of May of 18, my representative was going to be running for an open Senate seat. Now, I had met him, but we didn't know each other well. And he called me on Memorial Day of 2018. And he said, hey, and he gave me his name, and he said, have you ever thought of running for the House of Representatives? I said, nope, it's never crossed my mind. And I kind of laughed, too. And he said, well, I've got and so we talked about it. And this was my response. Now, granted, always conservative, always voted, didn't pay attention enough to what was happening in St. Paul during the process, only the after effects. And I said, you guys fight too much and you don't get anything done. And he said, no, stop watching all the news. And so we talked about it. I laughed, went downstairs. It was Memorial Day, so our adult kids were there. We had one out of town. My mom was there. I said, you're never going to believe this. And I told them what I had been asked. And we did laugh about it, but it was my daughter who said, what could you actually bring to that role? Business experience, elected official experience, involved in your community, involved in your church. What could you bring to that role? So I didn't know. We talked about it, laughed about it, thought about it through the night. And I love being able to tell this to a group of people in a church. This is my favorite part, because in our forums and the governor candidate things, we never have enough time to get into the weeds here. So I'm going to take an extra minute if I can. Okay. I had been involved in Bible study fellowship for a number of years. And I remember the beginning of May, I had found a verse in Romans that Paul was thanking the people along his journey. And that stuck out to me. He was thanking Erastus, the director of public works. And I remember going to my group, the Bible study ladies, and I was excited. And I showed them, I'm like, and in this verse. And they all kind of blank-faced and they nodded a little bit. And I'm thinking, that was the coolest verse in the world to me. Because God cared about our involvement in the community is what that stuck out to me as. And so I had marked it in my Bible, and I wished I would have brought my Bible with for tonight, but it's home. I was in St. Paul, but I have it marked in there, the date that I found it, because it stuck out to me. Right before we went to bed that night, I told my husband, hold on, there's a verse. This is before I told my representative that I would run. I got my Bible. I found it. I read it to him. I said, this is the verse. It mattered. God had Paul put this in Romans because it mattered, that he was thanking people. And my husband said, there's your answer. I didn't have to think or pray about it any further. I knew I was supposed to run for the legislature. And I did, and I won. and I have served now in my 4th term. It has been one of the best opportunities that I've ever had to serve my community. So if you look at that, serving as well, actually, I was a worship leader at my church for 16 years. Our church started in Cold Spring 33 years ago. Served and started a mom's group. Served and taught the girls program there. Served as a worship leader. I did those things. Then I served as a school board member, and this was going to be the next opportunity to serve my community in the legislature. We attend River of Life in Cold Spring. So we've been there from the very start when it started. We saw it from the ground up when we met in the Alano building and then the high school, and then finally built. And our kids got to rollerblade during the construction because we'd go do construction cleanup and we'd put the rollerblades on the littles and they could just kind of have fun while we were working. But really that involvement really mattered very much to me. Ran for the legislature. The areas that I focused on when I was first in the legislature, early childhood, because to me, if a community has strong child care and you're supporting families, you have a stronger community. Because of my school board experience, I served on education finance and then Greater Minnesota jobs, and then one of the next terms, health finance. And all I want is for Minnesota to be stronger and better. It seemed very simple. Now, my party was in the minority the entire time, which meant we could have really good ideas and they didn't need the votes and it didn't matter. Well, when we took the minority again, my 3rd term, so with the 22 election, that night, we were expected to take part of the majority someplace in state government. And I remember my husband knew that I won my legislative seat again. He went to bed, he had an early flight, and then the next morning I said, hey, we lost everything. We're in the deep minority here, full Democrat control in the state of Minnesota. And he said, well, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to quit. And he said, you would never quit. And I said, I know, I'm kidding. I ended up running for leadership within my caucus. Because to me, if you think things need to change and you see that they're not necessarily changing, step up, quit complaining, and just step in and start doing something, not because you may have all the answers, because something needed to change. Ran for leadership within my caucus, and I won as minority leader, serving the entire time that the Democrats had full control of state government. I will give a lot of credit to former Speaker Melissa Hortman. She's the only speaker that I had ever served under. When I became the leader, she called me and she said, congratulations, we should start meeting weekly. And I said, you don't even need my votes. And she said, we're going to be working together. We need to get to know each other. And even though we were on opposite political sides, I really learned a lot from that because things can seem so divided in the legislature, even though she and I did not agree politically. At least we got to know each other about our kids and her love of baking and gardening, both of us, and what mattered. Now, I couldn't change the votes, and the things that were done in 23 and 24 damaged our state for potentially generations. So I'm not saying that was okay, but what I am saying is when you can respect people and have civil conversations, even when you disagree, we are all going to be better because of that. And that absolutely. And I think that is what I wanted to bring to the role. So then, 2024, all of a sudden, that night of the election, we got all the results in by about 2:30 in the morning. We were in a tie. I get a text from Melissa that says, looks like we're blessed to work in a tie. I'm like, I'll see you in a couple of hours. We had to navigate our way through. Now, Tad talked about the overreach of the Secretary of State. He wouldn't recognize, he swore us in, but he wouldn't recognize us on the floor. I got sued at the Supreme Court level and had to tell my mom, don't respond on Facebook. I'm fine. I'm not going to jail. It's all okay, But it was really frustrating because the Democrats stayed out of power, or they stayed out of office, still collecting their checks because it's constitutionally guaranteed, and we couldn't stop it. 23 days we fought that. Let me tell you why prayer matters so much to me. I was in that room and negotiating because that was my job. I was going to be either co-speaker if we were truly in a tie, ended up being full speaker because they supported a guy that didn't live in the district. And so that's why they stayed out. I remember, I have a small group that'll pray for me and my husband, but we'd go back and forth with these negotiations, just figuring out how we start this out. Back in 1979, there was a tie in the House of Representatives. It did not go well. So Melissa and I decided we could get this done a little bit better. And we worked toward that until they stayed out, and then it was complicated. Still negotiating that organizational agreement, trying to be fair with it, trying to get it done. And finally, we hit an impasse that we could not get past. And it was math to me. Republicans had 67 members, Democrats had 66. That is not a tie. That is a one-seat advantage, even if it wasn't a functional majority. And I wouldn't give up on those things, such as a co-speaker and all of those things, because the math proved that there wasn't a tie. And I remember the night before we finally settled, after hours and hours and days of these negotiations, I called my husband late that night, and I said, I have prayed about this. I know we're doing the right thing. I'm not reaching for power or anything like that. This is the right thing for Minnesota. I don't know what to do. And he said, I'll pray. And I remember not being able to sleep most of that night. We walked in the next morning with other people from each side, so it was very equal in this meeting. And the offer that came across the table is exactly what we had been asking for days. And the question was, what changed? I remember walking out with my team. I'm like, what am I missing? And they're like, that's our offer. It was the right thing to do for Minnesota, which is why right now the things that 67 members with a Republican speaker are able to prevent is happening. Without that, we would have basically no power. So the things that I was able to do as Speaker of the House last year, negotiating 1/2 of 1/3 of state government, the only Republican in that room, ending the taxpayer funding of illegal immigrant health care. That means if people are here illegally, they absolutely can get the health care. It just means that they're going to have to pay for it, that the taxpayers can't pay for that. It had exploded by over 15,000 people, more than they expected total in 4 short months. We were also able to cut the budget by $5 billion, the spending, and we protected our non-public education from cuts that Governor Walz was insistent on. To me, it wasn't about the dollar amount for non-public education. It was an attack on religious freedom and the freedom of families to be able to make those choices. So I'm going to quick tell you what I have looking forward, then I'll turn it over to you, because I could talk to you all night. But what I want to do, though, as governor, my running mate is Ryan Wilson, and he had run for state auditor back in 2022. Fantastic person, lives in the Maple Grove area, married, dad of 5 kids, former business owner. He's an attorney. He's absolutely a fantastic person. He lost by 8,000 votes in the midterm. We had 200,000 Republicans that didn't show up to vote. This is how we can defeat whoever Senator Klobuchar is their person that'll be running, their candidate for governor right now. I didn't think it was going to be Tim Walz anyway, but here we are. And this is how we do it. We unify together as Republicans, and we get on the same page early on. And we work toward that. It doesn't mean fighting and being disrespectful to people and being crazy angry about things. It doesn't mean that. It means unifying in a message that makes sense. Lowering taxes, protecting our religious freedoms, protecting our kids so that they have the education that they deserve, public, private, charter, homeschool, keeping boys out of girls' locker rooms and bathrooms, because that is an issue of safety. That is just an issue of safety. Those are common sense things. Protecting our taxpayer dollars from the fraud that has gone rampant. Making sure that we are using taxpayer dollars in the best way and not overtaxing Minnesota. Also creating Minnesota to be business friendly so people can grow and thrive here. I am a pro-life person. I have always supported life from conception to natural death, and I won't back down on that. That is incredibly important. That is our future, and it is biblical. It is, yeah. We have gone so far from that, but there are opportunities to care about people. All of the funding for our pregnancy resource centers was taken away in 2023. Now, that gives the opportunity for a church to step up, absolutely. But there's no reason why we shouldn't restore that funding. And that is something that I would like to do. I've agreed to abide by the endorsement. I've always received that endorsement when I have run for my legislative races, and so I am both seeking and will abide by that endorsement. I do support our Second Amendment rights. That is our constitutional right, and we can have safe gun ownership in a responsible way, but people's hearts that think they need to use a weapon of choice to kill or hurt other people is where the original problem is, and we have to look at that. So with that being said, I know that I'm going to turn it back to you. There will be questions. Thank you so very much for listening and for staying engaged. It is my honor to be with you tonight.
Thank you. This is a little hot. That's why it almost yelled. It did yell at us. So we'll start with questions and answers, and when our third candidate comes, we'll let him jump in and speak a bit and then hit him with some questions too. That's okay? Yep. Okay. So the questions and answers can go on anywhere from a half an hour to an hour. Do you want to stand during that whole time, or would you rather sit? Because we glad